I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the conversation with Al McFarlane. I'm glad to be here and glad to have you along as well. Today is Monday, March 27th, 2023. And I want to start with the hot topics today. Before I do that, let me invite you to support this connection, this engagement, support the conversation with Al McFarlane by going to our YouTube channel. It's the Insight News channel on YouTube, and subscribe. Share, like, let people know that you're connected and be a part of this community of conversation that we are creating. We try to deliver, we promise, robust conversation. And I tell you, that's what we do every day, 5 days a week. Well, today, I want to start with, let you know that my guests today include Tonya Allen. She is the leader over at the McKnight Foundation. I talked to her recently in a community meeting. So impressed. I think you'll enjoy the conversation. I intend to enjoy the conversation. And then following Tonya, I'll be spending the balance of the hour with my friend and colleague, Yogi Sena, Mestre Yogi Sena, who joins us from Bahia in Brazil. And we'll talk about his work in the capoeira and in culture. And it should be a great conversation. Let me start with hot topics, though. And I am upset and sad and disturbed by the news of a school shooting in Nashville. Looking at an article from the Nashville Tennessean, and it says, Nashville school shooting, 6 fatally shot at Covenant School, including 3 children. Female suspect killed by police. And I was watching this on television a few minutes ago, and it makes you sick in your stomach and sad. And I just can't imagine that community, the classmates of these children, their families, the officers, the responders, the teachers. Wow. So the article just says briefly that 3 adults and 3 children are confirmed dead following a school shooting at Covenant School, which is a private Christian school in Nashville. The female suspect was killed in an altercation with police. Don Aaron, spokesperson for the Metro Nashville Police Department, said the female suspect was believed to be a teen entering in a side entrance with 2 assault rifles and a handgun. She was fatally shot by a 5-member police team. Aaron said that 7 total people, including the shooter, were confirmed dead. At the scene of one of the deadliest school shootings in Tennessee history, scores of parents and onlookers have now gathered in the parking lot awaiting updates. Helicopters circling the area and the surrounding residential helicopters are circling the area, which is surrounded by residential and a busy business district. The crews did pull some survivors from the scene. This happened at around 10:13 a.m. local time, and it's the 5th in the Nashville area since 2011, the first since 2018. Well, our prayers, and I'm sure your prayers, go out to them. What a tragedy, what a sad event, what a horrible thing. And I don't know what else we can say, but that we owe it to these children and to humanity to figure out what we're going to do about guns and gun violence. That what's happening right now, the status quo is not acceptable. Well, another story that I'm using as a hot topic, kind of the same thing. This is global. Associated Press reporting that a teenager fatally stabbed a teacher and wounded 5 others in Brazil. And this is a story that the AP released about 2 hours ago. And it says a 13-year-old student in Brazil's largest city of Sao Paulo fatally stabbed a 71-year-old teacher and wounded 3 teachers and 2 fellow students today in a knife attack at a public state school. State officials said. The 5 wounded victims in the Tomazia Montoro School were in hospital in stable condition. The suspected attacker was detained and under investigation by the military police, the government said. So we'll talk about that as well. It just says that this question of violence is not just Minnesota, not just the U.S., but global, and it will require global attention. Our final hot topic today is about a thing local here. It's something that's at the Inside News website. It says the Minnesota nuclear plant shuts down for a leak and that the residents are worried. And this is a story by, I think, Trisha Ahmed is the author of the story. Again, it's at InsideNews.com. It's stories an Associated Press story. And it says that in Monticello, the Minnesota utility began shutting down after a nuclear power plant near Minneapolis. This happened Friday after they discovered water containing a low level of radioactive material leaking from the pipe for the second time. And it says the utility and health officials say it's not dangerous, but the issue has prompted concerns among nearby residents and raised questions about the aging pipelines. So go to InsideNews.com, read about that. A lot of stuff going on. Well, let me open the program now by going to my first guest today, and that is Tonya Allen. And Tonya Allen is the president of the McKnight Foundation. Her brief bio here says she's a leader and a social change agent with a passion for co-creating an equitable, sustainable world. In 2021, she became president of the McKnight Foundation, a Minnesota family-based foundation that advances a more just, creative, and abundant future where people and planet thrive. Tonya Allen, welcome to the conversation. So good to see you again.
Good to see you too. Thank you so much, Al, for having me. And also, I too want to just share my heartbreak and
Yeah.
at all of the violence that's going on, and that our children aren't safe and teachers aren't safe. Like, we have to figure out how to create a spirit of renewal, and not just patch up these problems and with fixes. We need real solutions. So I just appreciate you talking about them this morning.
Well, and the most important thing is to not throw up our hands and say, "Oh, it can't be done." That
Exactly.
we are powerless, because I think we have the power to change things. We simply must develop the will and the commitment and see our thoughts through. We can think of a place that is freer, cleaner, freer of violence and stress, and that whose nature, I think, is clearly the empowerment of individuals, the
Right.
enabling of human beings to be the very best human beings they can be. That's imaginable. And if
I
it's
agree.
imaginable, I believe it's doable. Well, I
I
think
do
that's what
too.
I hear. That's what I hear in your voice and in your work. So it's a good
Yeah.
segue. I got a bunch of questions, Tonya, but this is informal. It's a
Okay.
conversation. And let me tell you that my commitment and my intent here is simply to be a good listener. Got a few questions, but a good listener. And my goal in listening is to elevate or to support your voice and your vision, to help you tell the story by listening as you tell it, and to be the punctuation and go from there. So that's my motive. That's my intent. And I enjoy what I'm doing. So I'm expecting to enjoy this conversation. Let me start then, Tonya Allen, by talking about McKnight Foundation. McKnight Foundation 101. Uh, what is the foundation? What's its purpose, mission? Where did the money come from? Whose money is it? And how does that play into the idea of public good, both in the past and today and going forward? It's a big question. Jump
Yeah,
in
it's a big
wherever you
question.
want to.
Happy to start. So, the McKnight Foundation is 70 years old. So we're nearly 70 years old. And it's a family foundation. The resources came from William McKnight, who was at one point the CEO of the 3M company. And so he established the foundation. And our mission, as you just put up, you see that, is that we want to create a more just world. And so what I would just say about the McKnight Foundation is that we have been a long time supporter of Minnesota. And we have focused on a few things, and we have a more emphasized and punctuated focus on a few things. So I'll share that with you. So for a long time, we've been an arts and culture funder. We've been a long time neuroscience funder. We have focused and invested in international food systems, and we've also focused on climate. More recently, in 2019, we developed what we call our twin priorities or our twin imperatives, and that's really to focus on climate change and racial equity. So during that time, right after we adopted that framework, the foundation went without a president for quite some time. And then I came in 2021, and my job has been solely to help this organization transform these program strategies to move our mission forward. So I've really been focusing on how do we as an institution go from grant maker to change maker. So we've been a very storied and I think successful foundation, investing in lots of wonderful things over that time. But what I've been focused on is how do we become a more robust change maker? So how do we show up as proximate partners in community, understanding what's going on in communities, complementing what's happening there, but also using the prowess of our institution. Obviously, we're a very influential place. So how do we use that influence capital? How do we use our grants capital? How do we use our investment capital? Our intellectual capital, our social capital in ways that actually allow us to move our work forward. We've been thinking a lot about, how do we do this work, not just in the Twin Cities, but how do we do it across the state of Minnesota? So for me, it's been about how do we create a big tent that will help us tackle our most complex issues of our time. My work in Detroit before I got here was really about helping, you know, lots of people, lots of organizations, civic partners across the board to come together to do something that we could never do by ourselves, nor could we ever really imagine doing it. And we were able to do and accomplish some really big things. And so that's the spirit that I bring to Minnesota, is this belief that there's a bigger we than there is an individual me. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about that, and how do we be responsive, like understanding that philanthropy is a catalyst, and we want philanthropy to help people come together, just like we talked about a few seconds ago, Al,
Mhm.
to solve problems. That most of the problems we created are human created problems,
Mhm.
and therefore the solutions are going to be human created solutions. And so we've just been doing that work. And so that's who we are and what we're about.
So I think about McKnight, the name, and I think about trees. My sense is that the McKnight family was one of the early families that were in the lumber business. I could be wrong. If they weren't in lumber directly, they were emerging as a business force at the time of the great railroad and lumber barons in Minnesota. Tell me, who are the McKnights? You talked about, and what is their family? How does the McKnight business organization create wealth that is able to be put to work in a foundation? And I'll
Okay.
ask you, Tonya, to talk about, the meaning of charitable giving, the meaning of, the work of foundations, both the obvious and any other tangential aspects, ways to look at this process of
Mhm.
charity as a instigator, a mobilizer, a problem solver. So,
Okay. Well, so my understanding is that the McKnight family, Mr. McKnight was actually a bookkeeper at 3M. So he really made his way into the company and became an executive. And what was so unique about him was that he really was an innovator. And he believed in exactly what we're talking about. Like, people are a part of the solution. He actually had a saying where if you put fences around people, you'll get sheep, right? Like, so his notion was like, let's give people the space to run, to create, and to do innovative things. And as a result of that, like, the company, people, society will be better. And I think that's the spirit of the McKnight Foundation. So he earned his wealth at 3M.
Okay.
He put that money into the McKnight Foundation. And the way that philanthropy, endowed philanthropy works, because that's what we are, an endowed foundation, is that you put the resources into the institution, you invest it. And once you do that, it goes from being private money. So it's no longer the McKnight family's money. It becomes money that is held in a private trust for public interest, right? So we are trying to do good in the world, and it's held in this public trust. The resources are then invested to make money, right? And so we basically invest 95% of everything that's in the foundation, and then we spend 5%. So the goal is that if you keep earning and you keep spending, that you will continue to grow the corpus so you can do more good and give out more grants and resources to nonprofit organizations or to organizations that are doing things that are good for the public interest. And so that's who we are as an institution. So one of the things that I think is really unique about the McKnight Foundation is that we have been really focused on supporting organizations that we believe are doing good work, that we believe are connected and close to community, that's willing to work in partnership with others. And so as we've invested in that work, we've also focused on redesigning and streamlining the way that we even make those grants. Because, you know, a lot of times when with foundations, it's like you got to read a ton of stuff. You have to send a lot of applications in, multiple applications, and still you can be denied. We are trying to streamline it so that it's more accessible to organizations so that they can apply, that the process is transparent, and that we're responsive. In some cases, we've even just submitted or sent out grants to organizations because we knew that the need was there. So for example, we just submitted, we probably gave out about $1.5 million in grants to small organizations that were already our partners. We know that the economy is contracting, and we knew that we wanted to put these dollars in the hands of many of these small nonprofits because we knew that they needed some kind of economic relief as we look at the inflation rates going up for everyone. So we said, instead of them asking us for it, if we know that there's a need, how do we just proactively support them and get those resources in their hands? So we're just trying to shake up philanthropy a little bit, do it a different way than we've done
That's
before.
amazing. What was their response? I mean, they get a mail?
Well, we got a lot of great responses. A lot of people who were basically saying, like, I was trying to figure out what we were going to do on this question, and you answered it for us before.
Sure.
We even had to ask. And a lot of people some people who are thinking about how to put that resource away for even a more stormier day, not necessarily a rainy day. So, you know, I think they've been very grateful for that. But I think what most important is that I think they see us more as partners in this way, that this isn't about, you know, I'd like people, foundations often say like our grantees. You will never hear me say that because they're not, that has this kind of like subjugated position. Like we can't achieve our mission unless we have extraordinarily strong, smart, talented partners who are doing the work that they're doing. So they're our partners. These are our grant partners that we have to invest in them if we want this work to be able to get done. And we depend on them for this work to be done. And so we want to show up not just with a check, but what else can we show up with as an institution to be able to support them as we try and create this future that we all desire.
5% distributed every year. But the foundation makes money by investing. Is the investment all in 3M, or is it investments in a diverse portfolio, or is it investments everywhere but 3M? How does it work?
It's all of the above. So we do have an investment still in 3M. It's a small share, but we have a pretty diverse portfolio. And one of the things that we've been doing, and we just recently made a commitment as a foundation, is that we're going to have a net zero endowment. And what that basically means is like, we're going to invest in things that's going to help us transition to a clean energy environment that we cannot, that saying where they say, let your money speak for you, or
Yeah.
I feel like I'm not getting the words right on that, but basically,
Something walks and something talks, something
yeah,
like
right.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
From the
Your
street,
money
from the
talks, right?
yeah.
And so part of what we are doing is making sure that our money talks. Like, is it supporting the things that we think are going to create, that helps us pivot into the future? And not just on clean energy. We know that the people who are most affected by the negative impacts in our environment are people of color. Like, people of color always get the brunt of everything. So if we can advance these kind of clean technologies, and particularly investing in things that we think will have an impact, how are they showing up in places where communities of color operate? Are they showing up in places, in rural and in urban places, where there might be people who have less resources from their
Mhm.
income? Do they too get an opportunity to access that? And then the last thing, we just adopted in 2021 a mandate around racial equity in our portfolio. So we're going to be digging into how we can invest in people of color, but particularly Black and brown um, managers, money managers, fund managers. How do we invest in and support their efforts as a way? Because we got to live our mission all the way through. I always say it can't just be about our headlines. It got to be our through lines. It has to be through every piece of us as a foundation. We have to be about racial equity and climate. Like, that's who we are as fundamentally, even as we do other things, arts and culture, as we do neuroscience, international food systems. All of that has to have these themes of equity and climate resiliency interwoven and fully a part of what we do, because it's who we are. So we
So,
want to be an integrous institution.
as a journalist, I can tell you that, and I want you to respond to this. What's been the change? And you've already hit it, but hit it again if you would, in the concept of the role and the impact foundations can have on social change,
Mm-hmm.
on leveling the playing field. And what's in my mind as I frame the question is the perception that, uh, in the classic sense, foundations supported the opera, they supported the huge art houses and art institutions, they supported, uh, like the Junior League and the Chamber of Commerce and all of those things that created an ecosystem that was, you know, that they helped, quicken or enrich, bring them into play. But there was a mutual benefit, and that as often as not, the things that an Al McFarlane out of North Minneapolis was concerned about were things that weren't on the radar or weren't being addressed or were seen in a hostile way. This is my perception.
Mm-hmm.
Not that it's the truth, just how I saw it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, uh, talk about then, how philanthropy saw itself as you look at it,
Mm-hmm.
and not particularly just, McKnight, but the whole arena of philanthropy, how it saw itself in the context of culture and
Mm-hmm.
what the shift is and what it's been. You're taking it somewhere, from my point of view, Tonya, that it's never been before. And I want to ask you about that as we go along. But so,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Well, I here's what I would say is I think that one of the words I use a lot of times is proximate. Like, how do we get close to the people who are experiencing the most harm, and who have the best insights about like what solutions ought to look like and what they need to solve for.
Mhm.
And I would say that philanthropy in the past was proximate to the things that it invested in the things that it was proximate to,
Mhm.
which was high culture, predominantly white institutions, supporting those institutions to create, a environment where they felt like it was building a high quality of life. But that high quality of life was only for a select number of people, I think, in
Mhm.
our community. And I
Mhm.
think what we're trying to do at the McKnight Foundation is to actually recognize that Minnesota is a very different place than it was even 20 years ago.
Yep.
We're so much more diverse. We have many cities across our region in the suburbs and urban areas all across greater Minnesota, and that's not even including the twin cities that have doubled and tripled, and sometimes as much as 50% of their population are now people of color.
Mhm.
And so, in order for Minnesota to thrive, we have to recognize these new realities that exist in our state. And we have to not only recognize those new realities, we need to see them as an asset, right? Like a lot of times people start talking about it, it's like, well, here are all of the challenges related to it. Well, no, let's not start defining people by what their challenges are. Let's define people by what their assets are. So here we have a very diverse pool of people who are hardworking, that are going into towns, that are helping towns to prevent them from losing population growth. They're helping them thrive. They're helping them bring new commerce into those places. So how do we continue to invest in them and grow that space? How do we make sure that they have access to good jobs and fair jobs? How do we make sure they have access to capital so that they can buy homes, start businesses, develop the neighborhoods that they live in so that they can build wealth in those communities? Like how do we make sure that people have a voice in the governing system and the structures of our state, be it at the city hall, to the county offices, all the way down up to the state, right? To the hallowed halls of our state capitol. So we want to make sure that we are giving people an opportunity to actually be a part of this society, contribute to this society. And so, and I think that has a lot to do with the ambitions of the foundation, recognizing places where they had not they missed the mark on some things, like that they hadn't really had a race analysis. And I was glad that they developed one, because I don't know if I would have came to the McKnight Foundation if our board hadn't tackled that question beforehand, but we're still tackling it, right? So even if you look at the McKnight Foundation's team, a lot of people say, well, why do you have to have a diverse team? Why do you have to have an inclusive team? Because we need the diversity of experiences, lived experiences, to show up in our work. And you'll see at the McKnight Foundation, we got a team that's super diverse. One of my former board members said to me at the end of the year last year, he said, "You have a team that looks like America." And that's the greatest compliment I could have, is that we want to look like that. And then by having these set of different diverse experiences, we should show up differently. We should act differently. Like as a Black woman who leads a big foundation, people say, how does race show up for you? I'm like, it shows up in everything. Like I lead like a Black woman. I lead from my Black experience, and that doesn't mean that I don't think about everyone else, because we never ask a white leader whether or not they think about everyone else, right? Like, so I have to think comprehensively about everyone that we're trying to serve, understanding that everyone has, in these different subgroups of people, have unique experiences, and I want to show up for them. I want them to understand that in my experience, that gives me an insight to understand and not to assume about their experience.
What is the spend for the McKnight Foundation each year right now? The 5%, what is your target for distribution on an annual basis?
Yeah,
we're somewhere how big is the organization?
Yeah, no, it's okay. We're somewhere between 110 and 120 million annually.
Of giving?
Yep, of giving.
Okay, great. And so that means that you are about, what, $1 billion organization? Is that it?
Almost 3 billion.
$3 billion.
We went above 3 billion until the markets dropped a bit last year. So we're, maybe about 2.6, 2.7.
How does it feel to be at the steering wheel?
It feels good.
I'm asking Tonya, asking Tonya Allen, the person, the Black woman, how does it feel to be driving this ship?
I feel like I'm where I'm supposed to be. Right? Like I am a talented executive. I know how to do change work. This institution has aspiration for that. And it is willing to take risk, and not a risk in me, because I think I'm a pretty known entity, but risk in how we shift and change and rethink the way we do work. the way who we listen to, who we talk to, who we invest in. And so I feel fantastic about the work that we have done and the work that's before us. We're going to keep pushing and pushing and pushing and changing, not just the way we do work. We're going to invite others that we partner with to change the way they do their work too. One of my favorite definitions of power is the ability to rewrite the rules. And what I find is that most people who are in power seats don't rewrite the rules. And so I'm here, and my goal is to rewrite the rules. And I want all of our partners, not just the people that we give support to, but people that we work on big issues with, to rewrite their rules too. And that's part of what we've been thinking a lot about with the Groundbreak Coalition.
Talk about the Groundbreak Coalition. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so Groundbreak Coalition is not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all problems. But one of the things that it is aimed to do is to try and get capital to people of color. So let me talk a little bit about that. So when I first got to town, one of the things I asked was like, hey, what can we do as an institution after the uprisings, after Mr. George Floyd's murder? And what people would say to me is like, we need to repair, we need to rebuild, and we need to reimagine. We're working on the repair and rebuilding. Why don't you go work on the reimagine? I did that. Our team went and started making investments in communities, asking them what would it look like if this was different, if that, what does ownership look like? What does thriving communities look like? And what they basically said back to us was like, we need capital, we need money to be able to do this work. And what would normally happen is that a foundation would look at that and we would say, oh, that's a lot of money. We can't do that much. So we'll give you a little bit, and then you got to go out and figure out how to find the rest of that. But the challenge with that is that's a setup. That's what happens every single time. It always happens that way when communities of color are asked for what they need. And so what we decided to do was to not allow that to happen again in the Twin Cities, or any place, right? What we basically said was like, if that's what you need, then let's go solving the question of capital. How do we get the money that you need versus asking you to jump through the hoops? So we went to a lot of our friends at some of the banks, the financial institutions, government, corporations, other foundations, and said, what would it look like if we tried to solve this question of capital? That if we could actually get people, if they were trying to buy a home, we could help them get the money to buy a home. If they were trying to start a business, we could help them get the money to start businesses or grow their business. And then finally, if they were wealth builders, they were trying to do development deals or make investments in communities, that they actually could have the resources that would allow them to be successful. So we took that question and said, instead of making these people figure out how you jump through hoops to try and get and access capital, why don't the people who have the capital, why don't we jump through the hoops? Why don't we change our rules so that we can create access? We're turning on the spigot of capital for these communities, and that we leave it on instead of turning it off. Because what happens normally is we'll say, like, let's do a little fund, like $30 million. We'll put the money over in the fund. And then once that money is gone, you never hear about the fund again, right? And so for us, it was like, we are not going to do a fund. We're trying to do fundamental change. How do we rethink the systems that allow that? It's not going to solve every problem. But what it does do is create an enabling environment for people who already have these goals and aspirations to be able to access the capital that they need. And we're still in the middle of it. We're still trying to figure out all of the processes around that. But I think we're going to make some pretty fundamental change. And I think that if we could do this, like if we could figure out how to move about $1 billion in capital, a little bit more than $1 billion in capital over a 10-year period, that what we'll see is probably a $4.5 billion investment in return. So you could see a $6 billion proposal that actually could help us close half of the Black home ownership gap that we have in the Twin Cities. You could fully close the people of color, brown folks gap that we have in the Twin Cities. You could begin to get businesses that are started, not just the mom and pop businesses, which is nothing wrong with those, but the ones that actually employ people, because we know that businesses, if you're a Black business, you're more likely to hire a Black person, right? I'd like to say it's the, we hire our cousins, and that's the same thing in the Somali community. It's the same thing in the Mexican American community, et cetera. So what we're trying, and also the Asian community. And then the last thing I would just say about Groundbreak is that we're taking a targeted universalism approach. And what does that mean? Many people probably know Dr. John Powell, who came up with this concept. And Dr. John Powell says, like, look, if you can figure out the solution for the people who've been most excluded, once you figure out that solution, that actually opens up doors and avenues to serve everyone who's been excluded and included. You actually get more by focusing and targeting. And so you get a more universal solution set by targeting the people who've been left out. And so we took on that question. And this coalition of people talked about it and said, you're right. We need to, not I'm right. We decided together, like, we have to do this. And it has to focus on Black people in the Twin Cities first before it can focus on anybody else. It's not to be exclusive in any form or fashion. It's actually like, once we figure out how you get the Black home buyer good, how you help the Black business owners, how do you help the Black wealth builders? If we can figure that out, then that is actually what creates this opportunity for us to be able to serve the Mexican American families, the Latin, anybody who has Latin descendancy, anyone that has African descendancy, anyone that has Asian descendancy. That creates this opportunity in this moment for us to be able to do more and better for everyone. And I didn't say indigenous, my bad.
You've got to go because your people are sending me notes on the side here, and mine are as well. This has been a rich conversation, but actually, Tonya, hopefully just the beginning. I have so much more to ask you, and I am so enjoying your analysis, your story, the story you're creating. So I'll simply ask you, will you come back and spend more time in this conversation? I think it's critical.
Of course. Well, you were my first conversation, because it was really important to me that when I came to the Twin Cities, that I talked to Black media first. Mm-hmm. And I will always be happy to come whenever you want to have me out.
It'll be more often than you think. Tonya Allen, thank you so very, very much. And, when I talk to you next time, I want to ask you about your mom and your dad, your grands, your genealogy and your vision for the future, personal. What motivates you, what drives you to do the work that you do. But that's the next conversation.
Okay, sounds Tonya, wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Take care. Thank you so much.
All right. I'm Al McFarlane. This is The Conversation. Wow, what a conversation. I'm so glad to have had that opportunity to speak with her. And, I can tell you that the direction she is taking and the markers she has set for herself, I've not seen anything like this. And I've been in the market as an observer and participant for, 50 years now. Insight celebrates its 50th anniversary in business and as a publication. And I tell you, something new is afoot. And there were hints of the direction, say, in the past 10, 15 years, but never the complete, clear, crystalline emergence of a new direction, a new path, empowered with the financing around it. This is something different, and I hope you'll join me in watching and listening and supporting. And the most important thing is that as Tonya Allen and her team demonstrate what is possible, what is doable, we, consumers, community, must ask and support other organizations, institutions, and businesses to show up differently and to see us differently, to renegotiate the relationship. I started off talking about how in history there was a perception that the network of economic ecosystem served white people well, and it served to exclude Black and brown people. That legacy of exclusion exists today still. That's what we're talking about right now, is how to change it, a seismic shift. And one of the things that moved us in that direction was the horrific experience of our community around the public witness for the murder of George Floyd and the many others that preceded it and the ones that have followed. But we're at a moment of reckoning, a day of change, and I think change is at hand. Change is afoot. Let's pay attention. Let me bring in my friend, my colleague from Bahia. Yogi Sena is a former Twin Cityan, went back home to Bahia in Brazil, and Yogi and I are collaborating to create a project that we call Afro Descendientes. And here's the background on that. I am Afro-Cuban. My father is Cuban-born. His parents Jamaican, Caribbean. Mother's side of the family is from the deep South, from Mississippi. Again, and that makes me also want to acknowledge the pain and suffering and the number of deaths in the past weekend in the Delta in Mississippi, people that are in rural communities that were devastated by a weekend of tornadoes. So a lot to think about, a lot to pray about, but a lot to do something about as well. Hopefully, all of us who are listening or watching are finding ways to engage organizations and resources and churches that can send support or send a good word or send a good thought to those families that have been impacted by the horrific weather conditions there in Mississippi over the weekend. Well, Yogi and I, Yogi's helping me crystallize this idea of Afrodescendientes. Afrodescendientes is a section that has been presented on an infrequent basis, but we're moving it to hopefully weekly frequency. And what we have done is connected with one of the guiding philosopher activist lights in South America in the name of Jesus Chucho Garcia, who is an author and educator, again, political activist based in Venezuela. And Chucho is sending stories to me. I invite Yogi to assist me in translating them from Spanish to English and to Portuguese, and then together we send them to our resources and get them translated into 4 other languages. The idea is to present a story, a text, something that's accessible, it's important, it's relevant, it's historical, it's cultural, but presented in the number of idioms that we show up in. That's why these articles appear in Spanish originally, then Portuguese, Yogi does the translation, then English, then French, then Somali, thanks to the huge Somali presence here in Minnesota, but also Yoruba, and Swahili, major language groups that our people experience. And our innovation here is simply to say that just by doing this, the act of doing this is an act of intent and enlightenment. We are speaking to the strength of our cultural legacy and our cultural future, our ability to communicate, to be with each other across the globe, across cultures, differently. Yogi, brother, good to see you as always. Unmute, how you doing, man?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me again.
Mm-hmm.
It is afternoon here in Salvador. So it has been raining a lot the last few days. A lot.
Well, you saw the story about the hot topic about the stabbing in Brazil. What do you know about that, and how does it strike you, and how does it strike the public in Brazil?
Yeah, here those kind of uh, occurrences is becoming uh, common somehow, or happening often. And yes, was a young person that stabbed a 73-year-old uh, teacher and was subdued by two other teachers. There is a video circulating here in the Brazilian media. It seems that actually he uh, or her, I'm not sure the gender of this person, but this person was, neutralized by one of the teachers by grabbing by the neck, while it seems that the attacker was to decapitate the the teacher. That's a 73-year-old lady,
Mm,
and I think the two other got injured by the attack.
mm,
But those events of mass shootings and school shootings or even drive-bys are becoming, something to expect here. As I said before many times, in certain way, Brazilian society and culture, since it's similar, composed by the same kind of ethnic elements, uh, and because of now the policy of mainstream culture bombarding so much other cultures, here, always replicates uh, positive and negative trends that are seen first in the US. Unfortunately, the negative ones, you
mm,
know.
mm, mm. Let me do this. Last time we talked, I asked you to be prepared to tell your own personal story. And you are a capoeira master, teacher, instructor, and I wanted to get a sense of how you came to that work, to the study of capoeira, and what is it, and explain that work and the passion. What does it
Hmm.
mean for you personally? But what is the work of your study and practice of capoeira?
Well, I am from Bahia, Brazil. It's a place that is peculiarly black. In the city that I live right now, I would say I think 90% of population is black. This does not translate into sharing structures of power. This is changing though. But so Brazil is like a little Bahia. It's like a little Africa,
Mm-hmm.
and Brazil and in America. Knowing that Brazil it's where has the second African descendant population in the world after Nigeria. So it's estimated that over 100 million Brazilians are black. So I live in a place where African traditions, in general, it got preserved, and new ones got created throughout the history. Capoeira is one of those cultural expressions. So capoeira is in many ways ambiguous, as many things of Afro-Brazilian culture presents to be, but that as a form of protection and resistance against the predominant culture. So capoeira is an art form that is deceitfully seen as a dance because it's traditional practice. It's very more ludicrous, as in a game than martial. But capoeira it is Brazilian Afro-Brazilian martial art, that first appear upon the immediate necessity to defend themselves, mainly when the enslaved people would run away from the plantations
Mm-hmm.
or places of torment and create communities that were called quilombos. So the name capoeira in itself, capoeira, it did start as a also as a rural phenomenon. The name capoeira um, is certainly is a rural name, but it is from the language of the owners of the land of Brazil. Capoeira is Tupi-Guarani, is a Tupi-Guarani compound word, capoe, that means clear in the forest, where the forest is not thick. So Brazil generally, there are tropical or subtropical forests that are very heterogeneous and thick, not like the forests in North America, they are homogeneous
Mhm.
and you can see light in between. So the capoeira is when naturally appears a clear. And it was in that place that one, the expeditions that would go to recapture the runaway enslaved people stop to rest and camp. And generally, it's where the avant-garde troops of the Quilombos would go do preemptive strikes to defend the approach of those expeditions, and then took that name as the fight of capoeira, you know, uh, and then later uh, as the game of capoeira. As I say, the traditional imagery of capoeira is the movements are
Mhm.
very how to say, maybe mm, very artistical when it's
Mhm.
played in a form of game. So it's a
Mhm.
form of strategy game that we do with your body. But of course, there is the martial art part of it that is always known to be. So, um, and of course, nowadays there is the sport capoeira. So capoeira is art that has spread out primarily from Bahia. What we know as capoeira, what we see around, it is um, evolution of
Mhm.
capoeira from the area that surrounds the Bay of All Saints. That's the bay where Salvador is so which is a great uh, center of Afro-Brazilian culture,
Mhm.
as well, like religion. A lot of the Afro-Brazilian culture that nowadays is the mainstream or became in many ways definition of Brazil, like samba. All this comes from this area, and as well candomblé, and all these other cultural expressions are related to capoeira, as well the rich culinary that we have here, that is Yoruba
Mhm.
culinary mix with some Portuguese that becomes the Bahian cuisine. A lot of palm oil, coconut milk,
Mhm.
hot peppers. Um, so capoeira to me, I started learning from my father. My father was a master of capoeira also. He was a student of the famous Mestre Bimba, that is perhaps the most important icon of capoeira. Mestre Bimba was the person that in certain way um, initiated the process of capoeira become accepted by the larger society or well, society, because
Mhm.
always it was seen, since it was mainly practiced by black people and poor black people, or black people that would be doing subaltern functions, was prohibited. So until around 1930, here in Brazil, a lot of cultural manifestations were prohibited uh, as a law, and one of the things that the police do was to go after, for example, temples of candomblé, for example, this week a a clip of a paper, I think it was from 1913, of Master Bimba with 12 years old, that he got detained, taken to the police station for being busted playing capoeira on the street here. So
Mm,
every black culture manifestation, even though that was somehow tolerated, but always are seen as a threat. But here, the difference is the sheer number that made the control difficult.
mhm.
We are a lot of people here. As I say, we are, close for 90% of the population.
Capoeira is
So
becoming recognized globally now, right? It's like karate or jujitsu. It's a global art form, martial art presently, right? Growing.
yes, yes, capoeira in certain way is kind of where some people say is becoming one of those cosmopolitan arts.
Hmm.
So our cultural manifestations of non-European countries, uh, or in many cases, in some cases, European countries, but cultural manifestations of those peripheral countries that nowadays you find in pretty much in any medium big city in the world. So it's like
Hmm.
capoeira, you find yoga, you find judo, karate, tango, samba
So,
groups,
are there
salsa
rankings
dance
in
groups.
capoeira like in karate, like the green belt and the yellow belt and purple and black belts, or how is the system organized? We got about
Yeah,
3 minutes left, I think.
there's a system similar to those. That varies accordingly to the groups. There is not still maybe not ever hegemonic institution that set up the rules, so it's still pretty much very polarized. But it is mostly of the groups are based on color belts. Some schools have seven, sometimes some others have 30.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay.
and they have 30 chances of make money. Anyway, you know, but yeah, it is everywhere now. And even in Minnesota, that I was the first. Now I think there is 5 or 6 different groups in
Yoji,
Minnesota.
look, we're out of time again. It goes so quickly, but I think it's just wonderful to have this conversation to talk personally. I'm going to, at a later show, have you talk more about maybe go through some of your photo libraries, and show some things that you have pictures of, and explain the growth and the beauty of capoeira. We're out of time. Yoji, thank you so much, Mestre Yoji Sena, who is our managing editor for Afro Descendientes, joining us regularly from Bahia in Brazil. Thank you, Brother Yoji. I'm Al McFarlane. This is the conversation. Next time, we'll have to ask you to do a demonstration of capoeira as well, if that's possible. We'll see you next time. Take care. Bye bye.